Amnesia: The Dark Descent is a horror game made in 2010 and published by Frictional Games, the same publisher who brought Penumbra series. In case you're not familiar with the game, I'll go ahead and give you a quick rundown of it. The setting is in an old and crumbling castle located somewhere in Prussia, set in the mid to early 1800s. You play as a man from London named Daniel, and your goal is to stop and ultimately kill a man named Alexander, whom, from what we learn, has manipulated you into kidnapping and killing innocent people for his gain. You drink an amnesia mixture to forget the things you have done, leaving yourself notes to make it your goal to stop Alexander at whatever cost. Throughout your journey, you are hunted by a shadow, as well as actual physical monsters, which pose significant challenges to your end goal. It's a pretty rough summary, but covers what is really important. Warning, this video will contain spoilers, so if you want to savor that, please be advised. Now, everyone's opinions differ, but I'd have to say that the overall quality of the story is one of the best. When I look at single-player games, I judge them based on story and gameplay, quality, replayability, visual looks, and soundtrack. And I think it's pretty safe to say that this game alone has set a huge example for other horror games on the market. The story in this game is pretty simple to follow if you try, but the best part about it is that it's not even required to get the full experience of the game, that meaning making it scary. The more you pay attention to the game's notes and story, the more you realize the weight and severity of the situation that you're in. The events described by the notes and flashbacks are pretty gruesome, especially the torture sequences going as far as to forcefully give victims an amnesia mixture to make them forget and go through the entire process again in order to extract more vitae, or vitae however you say it, which you learn more about in the game and even more about in Amnesia Rebirth. Some of the notes you are kind of required to read for some puzzles and directions, but more or less are optional as they're mainly story elements. But regardless, you can literally ball it all up and toss it away because no matter what, you will absolutely be scared, whether you pay attention to the lore or not. And that actually takes us to the next part of this, which is the gameplay itself. It really is hard to put into words, but even for a nearly 15-year-old game by now, there are very few, if any, games that create the same feeling as this one, at least in my opinion. The main reason for this is immersion and atmosphere. As you play through the game, it gets progressively more dangerous, obviously, but also progressively more insane, fitting as you yourself, both character and player, also get more insane. It definitely can give you a headache and make you sweat, and there have been plenty of players who have had to step away for this reason. One of the most intricate and probably one of the longest parts in the game, especially if you don't really know what you're doing, is the prison section. That is probably one of the scariest parts in the game, in my opinion, probably second to the choir. And the reason for this, one, of course, is because it's the prison. You know, nothing ever good happens in a prison, especially in a medieval setting on a horror game. The ambient sounds and music is not very inviting, like most of the game, but especially in this case. And it's very dark. You feel like everywhere you look around the corner, something is going to be waiting for you, and many times that is the case. And there is a lot of sections and elements that you have to cross, which you know something is going to happen. You know you have to do it, and it just makes it that much worse. Another pretty notable place in this game is the sewer. It actually doesn't have too much ambient sound to it, or rather music and soundtrack, but it is still a very hostile place. It's got a couple puzzles that you need to do, but it just creates the sense and feeling that something is going to be around the corner waiting for you. And that is, for the most part, actually 100% true. Now, there are some places in the game that are actually quite enjoyable to be around, like not scary at all. One of probably the best examples of this is the back hall right after the cellar archive tunnels water beast chase sequence. You get that really medieval grand music entrance I was talking about earlier. You get a nice light area. Now, of course, it all does turn to crap later on when the shadow gets there, but still, for sake of discussion, it is one of the nicer places to be in. This can be used to your disadvantage as well, with a false sense of security. The nearly silent and isolated castle already creates a dynamic that isn't very pleasant to be in overall, but you pair that with the music and sounds, and it makes it even worse. More on that later. There are very few jump scares that outright make a direct attempt to scare you or something along the lines of filling your screen with a cheap JPEG or a face to get a reaction. Instead, this game gets the horror factor from the constant feeling of being followed and something being behind you or even in front of you. This game actually teaches you the value and quality of closing doors behind you, trust me. Since you cannot defend yourself, your only option is to hide, or, worst case scenario, run. Early on, the hiding option is pretty easy to do, but as you go on, sometimes running is actually the only option you have. Put all these mechanics together, and it makes for an experience that gives you constant anxiety and fear of something that is about to happen. Atmosphere is very important in games, and this one does it absolutely perfectly, 100% flawless, especially as it progresses through the game. One place that makes a good example of what I'm talking about is the choir. Now, anyone who's played this knows the infamous choir. Virtually no place to hide, hard to see, and an unavoidable hostile environment. Another good place early on is the storage. Dark, murky, and pretty quiet, other than what happens down there of course, but creates an environment that gives you an impression that something could happen at any moment and you would be screwed. Graphics are decent, especially for a 15-year-old game, and there are some mods out there that even upscale the textures a bit and add some little tweaks. It would be nice to see some kind of Unreal Engine 5 level type remaster though, that'd be pretty cool. There is actually a file that you can access in the game files that gives you some background on the design of the game, such as art, writings, and early tests, which is pretty cool to see to say the least. Now, visuals are something that's focused on a little bit too much in modern games, in my opinion, rather than actual gameplay. But like I said, there's an in-depth and yet very good story with multiple endings, and also puzzles and mechanics that make the game itself more than just a hallway simulator like most horror games of today. You do actually have to put some thought into them, and they're not impossible to complete, but they definitely will make you think a little bit. I feel like the problem with many horror games of today is that they just feel like walking simulators with little actual gameplay, and it's more of just like an experience like you would have at like a Disney ride, for example. The Dark Descent has hubs where basically you have a section, which is an entrance to said section, the exit, which is blocked for whatever reason, and branches you need to go through to get through that exit. And nowadays, I'm not seeing too much of that at all, just like I said, just like a walkthrough that has some jump scares sprinkled out through here and there. You can actually see this kind of hub layout design concept in one of the early concept arts that I discussed in the hidden file early on. Soundtrack, like I said, is also a very important part to games, especially in horror games. The ambient sounds in this game do not create a very friendly environment, obviously, and though it is subtle, actually progressively gets more unsettling, I think would be the best way to describe it as. The sound goes from a mundane, eerie sound to a chaotic, almost sense of insanity, which makes sense as the game itself follows this same kind of structure as you progress through the story. The main castle parts have a grand medieval type sound, while the depths have a cold, chilling, kind of murky sound. In addition to the music portion, the ambient sounds themselves give off the feeling that the castle is haunted not only by ghosts or spirits or whatever, but more so by the events and memories of the things you've done as you move throughout the castle. There are a couple sequences, which are unavoidable chase sequences, that play in music that adds even more chaos and stress, especially during these high tension sequences. Then of course there's the dreaded sound of the monster spawning and the ambient music that follows with them. Some other notable sound elements, I guess you could say, are the flashbacks. They're very important because they give a huge piece of the story and a huge piece of sense of purpose to why you're there. The torture sequences, like I touched on earlier, are definitely a big part of this, as they are flashbacks from your memory of what gruesome things really happened, and they really articulate it very well, especially in a scene when you're approaching the upside down hanging saw part. You progressively get closer to it and it gets louder and quicker, and you almost don't even want to progress any further on, but of course you have to, and it just creates that build-up that really resonates within you. The voice acting is absolutely phenomenal in my opinion, and very true to the theme, and each character's voice fits their role in the game. For example, Alexander seems like a mysterious man on paper, but hearing him in the flashbacks solidifies this idea. Overall, this segment is pretty self-explanatory. Music and sound in games is actually pretty important and creates a piece that you can recognize the game by, similar to how Call of Duty Zombies music is instantly recognizable and tied to the game itself. Now the final part of this segment is the replayability portion, and this will carry into the next section as well. The modding community was very active and is actually still pretty active today, like earlier how I mentioned the upscale textures mod. The custom story addition to this game extended its lifespan and created a seemingly endless source of content for YouTubers and players alike. Thanks to its extremely user-friendly and easy-to-use editor system, it gave nearly everyone a chance to make their own stories. Whether they are short, dumb little things, or whether entire mods that feel like an entire game in themselves. One to be noted is Obscurity. That one is probably one of the most difficult playthroughs, horror-wise. There's an abundance of stories to choose from, and like I said, they're still being made to this day. It really did give the community a chance to shine, and is certainly a major factor into the game's lifespan. All of this carries into our next section. The Dark Descent, with its many custom stories, allowed a large amount of content for YouTubers to produce, like I mentioned earlier, similar to Minecraft and its infinite amount of mods creating a large library of content for Minecraft content creators to use. The Dark Descent gave PewDiePie, and even Markiplier to an extent, characters. One that immediately comes to mind is Stefano, and stuff like that gets the community and viewer base more engaged. So much so that there are several custom stories made directly for PewDiePie, completely centered around these characters and jokes he had while playing the game. And now, of course, while this is mainly due to the content creator themselves, the game certainly helps give a platform for them to grow on. This also creates more enjoyable content to watch, thus expanding the viewer base and so on and so forth. But the Dark Descent gave a plethora of content, funny reactions, and thanks to him, like I mentioned, characters and personas for the audience to enjoy and follow along with. That's pretty much it. Most of this video is just an opinion, like I said, but I do think many aspects of it, especially the part about the ambience, immersion, and how you can play the entire game to the full effect even without the story element, are pretty solid. This game paved the way and set a huge example for future horror games, and I think it truly is one of, if not the best horror game to date. I'm happy to see the community, even Frictional Games themselves, is actually still active in producing content like other games, merchandise, and just general posts. And I'm happy to see that it gave people an opportunity to start their gaming content careers and really enjoy themselves. If you did enjoy this video, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave a like, subscribe, comment what you want to see more of, and that's pretty much it.